In the shadowy halls of Blackthorn Castle, a priceless sapphire necklace vanishes during a family reunion, plunging the Whitby clan into suspicion and secrets. Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster, unravels a web of greed, betrayal, and hidden motives, from the charming cousin Victor's late night prowling to the loyal butler's unspoken burdens. Every clue points to a thief among them. With only 2 days to solve the mystery, can Miss Marple uncover the truth before the sapphire is lost forever? Dive into a classic Agatha Christie-style tale of deception and discovery. Chapter 1. The Gathering at Blackthorn Castle. The wind swept across the Cornish cliffs, carrying the tang of salt and the distant cry of gulls. Blackthorn Castle loomed against the grey sky, its turrets weathered by centuries, its stone walls unyielding to the gales that battered them. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in a sensible tweed coat, stepped from the hired car and gazed up at the ancient edifice. She had been invited by Lady Eleanor Whitby, an old acquaintance from a long-ago charity committee, to attend a family reunion celebrating Sir Reginald Whitby's 70th birthday. The occasion promised more than cake and pleasantries. The Whitby sapphire, a necklace of legend, was to be unveiled, its deep blue gems said to rival the sea itself. Miss Marple's sharp eyes, undimmed by age, took in the castle's imposing facade as she crossed the gravel drive. Her modest suitcase was carried by a footman, and she clutched her knitting bag, a familiar companion that had accompanied her through many a curious affair. Lady Eleanor greeted her in the entrance hall, her elegance tempered by a faint anxiety. In her smile, "Jane, how good of you to come," she said, her voice warm but strained. "It's been too long, and we've quite a gathering this week." The grand hall was a spectacle of faded opulence. Tapestries hung on the walls, their colors muted by time, and a chandelier gleamed dully above a long oak table. The guests had already begun to assemble, and Miss Marple, with her knack for blending into the background, observed them keenly. Sir Reginald, a portly man with a florid face and a hearty laugh, stood by the fireplace, regaling a small audience with tales of his youth. His health, Miss Marple noted, seemed precarious, his breath catching slightly as he gestured. His niece, Clara Whitby, a young woman in her 20s, with vivid green eyes and a restless energy, hovered near a display case where the sapphire necklace rested. Her fingers traced the air above the glass, as if drawn to the jewel's allure. Lord Percival Whitby, Sir Reginald's uncle, cut a striking figure in a tailored suit that did little to soften his military bearing. His mustache twitched as he spoke loudly of his days in the regiment, his voice carrying a note of self-importance. Miss Marple, sipping a cup of tea provided by the ever-present butler, Mr. Grayson, caught the colonel's proprietary glance toward the sapphire. It was the look of a man who felt entitled to more than he possessed. Grayson himself moved with the silent efficiency of a shadow, his face impassive, though Miss Marple detected a faint tension in his posture as he poured sherry for the guests. Then there was Victor Langston, a distant cousin who had arrived only a month prior, claiming a desire to reconnect with the family. His charm was effortless, his smile disarming, but Miss Marple's practiced eye noted a certain calculation in his gaze. He lingered on the fringes of the group, his laughter a touch too ready, his anecdotes of foreign travels polished but vague. She recalled a young man from St. Mary Mead, a charmer who had swindled half the village before his past caught up with him. Victor's expensive cufflinks gleamed, but his shoes bore the scuffs of a discrepancy that piqued her curiosity. Dinner was a lavish affair, with silver gleaming under candlelight and conversation flowing as freely as the wine. Sir Reginald toasted the sapphire, which had been brought out for the occasion, its facets catching the light like a captured star. A family treasure, he declared, and a reminder of our legacy. Clara's eyes sparkled as she gazed at it, while Lord Percival muttered something about its value being better spent on investments. Victor, seated across from Miss Marple, offered a toast to family unity, but his eyes strayed to the necklace. Grayson, serving with precision, seemed to notice everything and nothing, his presence as unobtrusive as the ticking of the grandfather clock. As the evening drew to a close, Sir Reginald announced that the sapphire would be returned to the castle's safe, a formidable iron box in the library. Miss Marple watched as he and Grayson performed the ritual, the safe's heavy door clanging shut with a sound that echoed finality. She retired to her room, a cozy chamber with a view of the cliffs, and sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly. The castle was alive with undercurrents: Clara's ambition, Lord Percival's resentment, Victor's guarded charm, and Grayson's quiet vigilance. Miss Marple's mind, as sharp as the needles in her hands, began to unravel the threads of the gathering, sensing that the sapphire's brilliance might illuminate more than just the room. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Jewel. The dawn broke over Blackthorn Castle with a pale, reluctant light, the cliffs shrouded in mist that clung to the stones like a ghostly veil. Miss Jane Marple, an early riser by habit, was already seated by her bedroom window, her knitting needles moving rhythmically as she watched the sea churn below. The events of the previous evening, the glittering sapphire, the undercurrents of tension among the Whitby family, the polished charm of Victor Langston, had settled in her mind like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be arranged. She was not surprised, therefore, when a piercing scream shattered the morning's quiet, echoing through the castle's stone corridors. Miss Marple set aside her knitting, adjusted her shawl, and made her way downstairs with a calm that belied her curiosity. The scream had come from the library, where Lady Eleanor Whitby stood, her face ashen, her hands trembling as she clutched the arm of a backed chair. Sir Reginald, still in his dressing gown, was beside her, his florid complexion drained to a sickly pallor. The safe, its iron door ajar, gaped like an accusing mouth, and the velvet cushion within was bare. The Whitby sapphire, the pride of the family, was gone. "My dear Jane," Lady Eleanor said, her voice quavering as she caught sight of Miss Marple in the doorway, "it's vanished." The necklace o'er Legoose stolen. Her eyes, wide with distress, darted toward the safe, as if hoping the jewel might reappear by sheer will. Sir Reginald, recovering his voice, roared, "This is an outrage. Who dared touch it?" Grayson, he turned to the butler, who had entered silently, his face a mask of professional composure. "You checked the safe last night, man. Speak." Grayson inclined his head, his tone measured. "I did, sir. The necklace was secure when I locked the safe at 10:30, as you instructed. I have not touched it since." His eyes, dark and unreadable, met Sir Reginald's briefly before lowering respectfully. Miss Marple, standing quietly to one side, observed the scene with her usual unobtrusive acuity. The library, with its shelves of leather-bound volumes and heavy damask curtains, was undisturbed, save for the open safe. No windows were broken, no furniture overturned. The theft, it seemed, was a work of precision, not violence. She noted Clara Whitby, who had just entered, her green eyes wide with shock, but also, Miss Marple thought, a flicker of something else, curiosity, perhaps, or fear. Lord Percival, his mustache bristling, stormed in behind her, his voice booming with indignation. "Call the police at once," he demanded. "This is no time for dithering, Reginald. A thief is among us, and I'll not stand for it." His military bearing was as stiff as ever. But Miss Marple caught the nervous twitch of his fingers, a habit she had noticed the previous evening when he spoke of his financial reverses. Victor Langston, the last to arrive, slipped into the room with a casual grace that seemed out of place amid the chaos. His dark hair was neatly combed, his smile almost apologetic. "A dreadful business," he said, his voice smooth. "But surely it's an inside job. Who else could know the safe's combination?" His gaze lingered on Grayson, who remained impassive, though Miss Marple noticed the butler's hands clench briefly behind his back. Clara, her voice sharp, countered, "It could have been a servant. Someone might have overheard the combination." "Uncle Reginald, you're not always discreet when you've had a glass or two." Her tone was accusatory, but her eyes darted toward Victor, as if seeking his reaction. Sir Reginald, flustered, waved a hand. "Nonsense. Only Grayson and I know the combination, and I trust him implicitly. Don't I, Grayson?" The butler nodded, but Miss Marple sensed a shadow of discomfort in his posture, a slight rigidity that suggested more than professional loyalty. Lady Eleanor, regaining some composure, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, you've a knack for these things. I've heard of your little successes in St. Mary Mead. Would you look into this? Reginald is loath to involve the police just yet. It's a family matter, after all." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "I'm no detective, Eleanor, merely an old woman who notices things. But if you wish, I'll ask a few questions. 2 days, perhaps, before we trouble the authorities." Her tone was modest, but her mind was already at work, cataloguing the faces before her. Sir Reginald's bluster, Clara's agitation, Lord Percival's indignation, Victor's calculated calm, and Grayson's guarded silence. Sir Reginald, relieved, agreed. 2 days, Miss Marple. Find the scoundrel who's taken our sapphire, and I'll be forever in your debt." He sank into a chair, mopping his brow, while the others dispersed, their voices trailing into murmurs of suspicion. Miss Marple remained in the library, her knitting bag at her side, and approached the safe. It was a sturdy affair, its lock gleaming with the polish of recent use. She ran her fingers along the edges, noting the absence of scratches or pry marks. The combination dial was smooth, its mechanism intact. "A clever thief," she murmured, recalling a case in her village where a locked chest had been opened with a duplicate key, crafted from a wax impression. The simplicity of such methods often outwitted the most sophisticated defenses. She turned to Grayson, who lingered by the door. "Mr. Grayson, you're certain the safe was locked last night? No one lingered nearby when you closed it?" Her tone was gentle, almost conversational, but her eyes were sharp. Grayson nodded. "Quite certain, madam. I checked the room myself. The family had retired, and the servants were in their quarters. I saw no one. His voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward the window, as if he were recalling something or avoiding it. And the combination, she pressed, it's not written down anywhere. No chance it could have been seen. Never. Madam, Sir Reginald changes it monthly, and I memorize it. It's kept strictly between us. His tone was firm, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw, a sign she had seen in many a truthful man with something to conceal. Guilt, perhaps, but a private worry. She thanked him and moved to the window, which overlooked the courtyard. The latch was secure, the glass unbroken. The castle's walls were thick, its windows high and narrow. A thief from outside would have needed a ladder and considerable daring, yet the absence of disturbance suggested an intimate knowledge of the castle's routines. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the family, each with their own motives and opportunities. Clara, she recalled, had been fascinated by the sapphire, her eyes lingering on it with an artist's appreciation. Or was it greed? Her dependence on Sir Reginald's allowance was a burden, and Miss Marple knew from experience that financial strain could drive even the most spirited to desperate acts. In St. Mary Mead, a young woman had once pawned her mother's brooch to fund a dream of independence. Could Clara have acted similarly? Perhaps not to sell the sapphire, but to claim it as her own? Lord Percival's bluster was another matter. His financial troubles were no secret, and his proprietary attitude toward the necklace suggested a man who felt entitled to its value. Miss Marple had known such men proud, resentful, quick to justify their actions. His alibi, drinking alone in the study, was conveniently unverifiable, and his insistence on calling the police struck her as a possible deflection. Yet his pride seemed to outweigh his cunning, and she wondered if he had the subtlety for such a theft. Victor Langston, however, was a different puzzle. His charm was a veneer, polished but thin, and his vague accounts of his past raised questions. Miss Marple had seen his type before, a young man in her village, all smiles and promises, who had left a trail of debts and broken trust. Victor's glance at Grayson during the accusations was telling, as if he were testing the butler's reaction. Was he deflecting suspicion, or did he know something about Grayson's own secrets? Grayson himself was an enigma. His loyalty to the Whitbys was evident, but Miss Marple sensed a personal burden in his demeanor. She recalled the photograph in his pantry, a young woman whose features suggested a familial tie, a daughter, perhaps, or a niece whose troubles might weigh on him. In St. Mary Mead, a loyal gardener had once covered for his son's petty theft, driven by love rather than greed. Could Grayson's discretion hide a similar loyalty? As the morning progressed, Miss Marple joined Lady Eleanor for tea in the drawing-room, where the family's tensions simmered beneath polite conversation. Clara, sketching in a notebook, spoke of her plans for an art exhibition in London, her voice bright but strained. The sapphire would inspire such work, she said, then caught herself, her cheeks flushing. Not that I'd want it for myself, of course. Lord Percival, nursing a brandy, despite the hour, scoffed. Inspire. It's worth a fortune, girl. You'd do better to sell your scribbles than dream of jewels. His tone was harsh, but Miss Marple noted the way his hand trembled, betraying a nervousness he sought to conceal. Victor, lounging by the fireplace, offered a placating smile. "Let's not quarrel. The sapphire's gone, but it's likely still in the castle. Thieves don't vanish into thin air." His words were reasonable, but Miss Marple caught the slight edge in his voice, as if he were probing the other's reactions. Lady Eleanor, anxious to restore calm, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, what do you make of it? You've a way of seeing through people. Surely you've some idea already." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly. "It's early yet, Eleanor. People are like skeins of wool tangled at first sand first. But one can see the threads of motive and opportunity if one looks closely enough." Lady Eleanor nodded, her face still pale. "You'll have free rein to ask questions, Jane. The servants will cooperate, and the family, well, they'll have to, won't they?" Her attempt at humor was feeble, but Miss Marple appreciated the effort as the family dispersed to their rooms. Miss Marple lingered in the library, her mind already weaving a pattern from the morning's events. The sapphire's absence was a challenge, but it was the human heart, its desires, its secrets that held the key. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead, where a trusted housekeeper had used her knowledge of the household to pilfer a silver teapot. The answer, Miss Marple knew, lay not in the mechanics of the theft, but in the why and the who. With her knitting bag in hand, she resolved to unravel this mystery, thread by thread, before the sapphire was lost forever. Chapter 3. The family's secrets. The morning mist had lifted, revealing the rugged cliffs beyond Blackthorn Castle, but within its walls a different kind of fog lingered, one woven from suspicion and unspoken truths. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with a cup of tea and her ever-present knitting, observed the household with the quiet attentiveness of a spider in its web. The theft of the Whitby sapphire had stirred the family into a restless dance, each member moving to their own rhythm of motive and alibi. To unravel the mystery, Miss Marple knew she must first understand the threads that bound this family together, and those that threatened to tear it apart. Lady Eleanor, ever the gracious hostess despite her distress, joined Miss Marple for a private conversation over breakfast. The morning room, with its tall windows and faded chintz curtains, offered a view of the garden, where dew still clung to the roses. Lady Eleanor's hands fidgeted with her napkin as she spoke, her voice low to avoid the ears of passing servants. "Jane, I scarcely know where to begin. This theft tits more than a loss of a jewel. It's a betrayal. Someone in this house, someone we trusted." Her words trailed off, and her eyes, usually so composed, betrayed a flicker of fear. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of gentle concern. "Families, Eleanor, are like old tapestries, beautiful from a distance, but up close, one sees the frayed threads, the hidden stitches. Tell me about yours, who might have had cause to take the sapphire." Lady Eleanor hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clara, my niece. She's a dear girl, full of fire, but she's struggled since returning from London. She wants to be an artist, you see, but her paintings don't sell, and Reginald's allowance is all she has. She's proud, Jane, too. Proud to ask for more. But I've seen her look at the sapphire with such longing. Not greed, mind you, but something else. A dream, perhaps." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. She recalled a young woman in St. Mary Mead, a dreamer who had taken a silver spoon to fund a fleeting ambition. And Lord Percival? She prompted, her tone mild but probing. Eleanor sighed. Percival is Reginald's uncle, but he's been more like a demanding guest these past years. He was wealthy once, with estates in Hampshire. But he lost much of it bad investments, they say, and a fondness for the races. He resents Reginald's fortune, though he'd never admit it. He's always talking of the sapphire as if it were his due, part of the family legacy he ought to control. Her lips tightened. He's harmless, I think, but his pride makes him difficult. And Victor Langston? Miss Marple's question was casual, but her eyes sharpened behind her spectacles. Eleanor's brow furrowed. Victor is an enigma. He's a distant cousin, from a branch of the family we'd lost touch with. He arrived a month ago, all charm and good manners, saying he wanted to know his roots. But he's vague about his past, something about finance in Paris, or was it Vienna? I can't help feeling he's not entirely what he seems. She paused, glancing toward the door. And Grayson, our butler, he's been with us for decades, loyal as the day is long. But lately he's been distracted. I can't imagine why. Miss Marple filed these observations away, her mind already drawing parallels to her village experiences. Loyalty, ambition, resentment, these were familiar motives, as old as the hills and as dangerous as the cliffs outside. She thanked Eleanor and, with her knitting bag in tow, set out to speak with the family. Determined to tease out their secrets one by one, her first encounter was with Clara, whom she found in the conservatory, sketching the view of the sea with fierce concentration. The young woman's auburn hair was pinned haphazardly, and her fingers were smudged with charcoal. Miss Marple, settling onto a wicker chair, commented on the sketch's bold lines, drawing a shy smile from Clara. "You've a gift, my dear," she said. "It must be hard to pursue such a passion without the means to support it." Clara's smile faded, and she set down her pencil. "It is. Uncle Reginald is kind, but his allowance barely covers my paints, let alone a studio in London. I thought my work would sell by now." Her voice was bitter, and Miss Marple noted the way her eyes drifted toward the castle, where the sapphire had once rested. "You admired the sapphire," Miss Marple said gently. "It must inspire such an artist as yourself." Clara flushed. "It's beautiful, yes. I sketched it once, just to capture its light. But I'd never. Miss Marple, you don't think I took it, do you?" Her indignation was genuine, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease, as if Clara feared her own desires had betrayed her. "Of course not," dear Miss Marple soothed. "But you were up late last night, were you not? I heard footsteps in the hall." It was a gentle probe, and she watched Clara's reaction closely. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I couldn't sleep. I was in the drawing room, sketching by candlelight. The sapphire, it was on my mind, I admit, but only as inspiration." Her words were earnest, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her hands, a sign of nerves. Or perhaps a half-truth. Leaving Clara to her work, Miss Marple sought out Lord Percival, who was in the billiard room, idly knocking balls across the green baize. His mustache bristled as he greeted her, his tone gruff. "Miss Marple, I hope you're making progress. This theft is a disgrace to the family name." He struck a ball with more force than necessary, sending it clattering into a pocket. Miss Marple smiled placidly. I'm only beginning, Lord Percival. You seem quite certain the thief is within the household. Have you any suspicions? He snorted, leaning on his cue. It's obvious, isn't it? Someone who knew the safe's combination. That butler, Grayson, he's too quiet for my liking. Always lurking, listening. And that cousin, Victor, what do we know of him? A nobody. Turning up out of the blue. Mark my words, it's one of them. His voice was loud, but Miss Marple noticed the way his eyes avoided hers, focusing instead on the billiard table. And your own movements last night? She asked, her tone as mild as if she were inquiring about the weather. Lord Percival's face reddened. I was in the study, having a nightcap, alone, as it happens. No one to vouch for me, but I'm no thief, Miss Marple. I'd sooner sell my last medal than touch that sapphire. His indignation was fierce, but Miss Marple caught the nervous jingle of coins in his pocket. A habit she had seen in men with something to hide, not necessarily guilt, but perhaps shame. Her final conversation of the morning was with Victor Langston, whom she found in the library, leafing through a volume of poetry with an air of studied nonchalance. His dark eyes lit up as she entered, and he rose with a charm that was almost too perfect. Miss Marple, I hope you're not finding us too dull. This theft is quite the excitement, isn't it? His tone was light, but his smile seemed to mask a deeper calculation. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. Excitement is not always welcome, Mr. Langston. You suggested the thief knew the household well. Have you noticed anything unusual since your arrival? Victor's smile didn't waver, but his fingers tightened on the book. Only what you'd expect in a place like this: old grudges, hidden debts. Clara's desperate for her art to succeed, and Percival's forever moaning about his lost fortune. As for Grayson, he's the soul of discretion, but even he must have his secrets. He leaned forward, his voice conspiratorial. You know, in Paris, I heard of a theft where the butler used a duplicate key. Clever, don't you think, Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Very clever. And where were you last night, Mr. Langston, when the sapphire was taken? He laughed, a sound too smooth to be entirely genuine. In my room, reading. I'm afraid I've no exciting alibi, Miss Marple, but I've no need for jewels. I prefer simpler pleasures. His words were glib, but Miss Marple noted the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow, a detail that reminded her of a young man in St. Mary Mead who had lied about a stolen watch. As noon approached, Miss Marple returned to her room, her mind a tapestry of impressions. Clara's ambition, Percival's resentment, Victor's charm, and Grayson's discretion each held a piece of the puzzle. But the pattern was not yet clear. She thought of a case in her village, where a stolen locket had been hidden by a trusted friend, driven not by greed but by desperation. The sapphire, she sensed, was still close, its thief bound to the castle by necessity or nerve. With her knitting needles clicking like a metronome, Miss Marple resolved to watch and listen, knowing that the truth, like a dropped stitch, would reveal itself in time. Chapter 4. The Butler's Discretion. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Blackthorn Castle's stone floors, its feeble warmth no match for the chill of suspicion that had settled over the household. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, moved with quiet purpose through the corridors, her sensible shoes making scarcely a sound. The theft of the Whitby sapphire had stirred the family into a restless unease, and Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing beyond the surface, knew that the key to the mystery lay not only in what was said but in what was left unsaid. Her morning conversations had revealed the family's tangled motives, but now she sought a different perspective, that of Mr. Grayson, the butler, whose discretion was both his shield and perhaps his burden. She found him in the pantry, a narrow room, lined with shelves of polished silver and crystal. Grayson stood at a small table, methodically cleaning a set of candlesticks, his movements precise, almost meditative. The air smelled faintly of polish and old wood, and a single photograph rested on a shelf above a young woman with a shy smile, her features bearing a subtle resemblance to Grayson himself. Miss Marple noted it, but made no comment, instead offering a gentle smile as she approached. "Good afternoon, Mr. Grayson," she said, settling onto a stool with an ease that invited confidence. "I hope I'm not interrupting. You've remarkable talent for keeping everything in order, even in such trying times." Grayson paused, his cloth still in hand, and inclined his head. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's my duty to maintain calm, whatever the circumstances." His voice was steady, his accent polished by years of service, but Miss Marple detected a faint strain, like a violin string stretched just shy of breaking. She began to knit, the soft click of her needles filling the silence. "A trying business. This theft, the safe, you said, was secure last night. Yet someone opened it without force. That suggests a certain intimacy with the household. Wouldn't you agree?" Grayson resumed polishing, his eyes fixed on the candlestick. "Indeed, madam, the safe is old but reliable. Only Sir Reginald and I know the combination, and I locked it myself after the dinner." He hesitated, then added, "I checked the library afterward. All was as it should be." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze soft but piercing. "And no one lingered nearby? No one who might have seen or heard something useful?" She asked this with the air of an elderly aunt seeking gossip, but her eyes missed nothing. The slight tightening of Grayson's fingers, the way his glance flickered toward the photograph. "No one, madam," he said, but his pause was a fraction too long. The family had retired, and the servants were in their quarters. "I locked the outer doors myself." His tone was firm, yet Miss Marple sensed a reticence, as if he were weighing how much to reveal. She nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. "You've been with the Whitbys for many years, I understand. Such loyalty is rare. You must know the family's habits well, perhaps better than they know themselves." Her voice was warm, inviting confidence, and she saw Grayson's shoulders relax slightly. 30 years, madam," he said, a touch of pride in his voice. "I came to Blackthorn as a young man, under Sir Reginald's father. The family has its ways, as all old families do." He set the candlestick down, his hands steady but deliberate. "They're not without their troubles, but I've always kept their confidences." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes drifting to the photograph. "And your own family, Mr. Grayson. That young lady, she looks a kind soul." It was a gentle probe, and she watched his reaction closely. Grayson's hand stilled, and for a moment his composure wavered. "My daughter, Emily, madam. She's away in London. A good girl, but life hasn't been kind to her." His voice was low, and Miss Marple caught the shadow of pain in his eyes. A look she had seen in St. Mary Mead when a father spoke of a wayward child. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said softly. "It must be hard, being so far from her." "Does she visit often?" Grayson shook his head, his expression closing like a door. "Not often, madam. She has her own life now." He picked up another candlestick, his movements brisker, as if to dismiss the topic. Miss Marple noted the change, but pressed no further, instead shifting her line of inquiry. "Last night," she said, "you mentioned checking the library. Did you notice anything unusual, perhaps not in the room, but in the household? A guest out of place, a sound out of the ordinary?" Grayson hesitated, his cloth pausing mid-stroke. "There was Mr. Langston, madam. I saw him in the corridor, near the library, rather late. He said he was fetching a book, but he seemed unsettled. I thought little of it at the time." His tone was cautious, as if he regretted speaking, and Miss Marple made a mental note of Victor's nocturnal wanderings. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said, rising with a smile. "You've been most helpful. I shan't keep you from your work." As she left the pantry, she glanced back, seeing Grayson's eyes linger on the photograph, his expression one of quiet sorrow. Her next task was to examine the library more closely. The room was as she had seen it that morning, its heavy oak shelves and thick curtains undisturbed. The safe, still open, stood in a corner, its iron bulk a silent witness to the theft. Miss Marple approached it, her eyes scanning for details the others had overlooked. The lock was pristine, its dials smooth, with no signs of tampering. She ran her fingers along the safe's edges, recalling a case in her village where a locked box had been opened with a hairpin, the thief exploiting a forgotten flaw in the mechanism. But this safe was modern, its design unyielding to such tricks. She turned her attention to the room itself. The windows were high and narrow, their latches secure, and the carpet showed no unusual marks. A faint scent of lavender lingered near the safe, a detail that struck her as curious. Perfume, perhaps, or a clue left by the thief. Miss Marple filed it away, her mind already weaving connections. The absence of forced entry pointed to someone with access or cunning, and Grayson's mention of Victor's late-night presence was a thread worth following. As she left the library, she encountered Clara, who was pacing the hall, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. The young woman's eyes were red, as if she had been crying, and Miss Marple paused, her maternal instinct stirred. "My dear, you seem troubled," she said gently. "Is there something you'd like to share?" Clara hesitated, then shook her head. "It's nothing, Miss Marple, just this theft. It's upset everyone, and I can't help feeling it's my fault somehow." Her voice was unsteady, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers tightened on the sketchbook, as if it were a shield. "Nonsense, child," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "But if you've seen or heard anything, even the smallest detail, it might help. You were up late last night, weren't you?" Clara nodded, her eyes darting away. "I was sketching, as I told you. I didn't see anything, but I heard footsteps near the library. I thought it was Grayson, doing his rounds." She bit her lip, then added, "Victor was up, too. I saw him in the hall, but he didn't see me. He looked nervous. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind noting the overlap with Grayson's account. Victor's presence near the library, coupled with his evasive charm, was becoming a pattern. She recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead who had wandered the Vic at night, claiming insomnia, but later found to be pilfering from the poor box. Victor, she suspected, was no stranger to deception. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple returned to her room, her knitting a steady companion as she pondered the day's findings. Grayson's loyalty was genuine, but his daughter's troubles suggested a vulnerability that could be exploited. Clara's agitation hinted at guilt or fear, perhaps both, while Victor's late-night movements were too convenient to ignore. The lavender scent near the safe was a puzzle, one that might tie to Lady Eleanor or another clue entirely. Miss Marple thoughts drifted to a theft in her village, where a trusted servant had hidden a stolen brooch in a flower pot, driven by a desperate need to help a loved one. The sapphire, she sensed, was still within reach, its thief bound to the castle by necessity or arrogance. With her needles clicking like a quiet clock, she resolved to watch closely, knowing that the truth would surface, as it always did, in the smallest of details. Chapter 5. The Cousin's Charm. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Blackthorn Castle, casting a golden haze over the gardens where Miss Jane Marple strolled with Victor Langston. The air was crisp, scented with salt from the nearby cliffs, and the gravel crunched softly underfoot. Miss Marple, her knitting bag slung over her arm, had suggested the walk, sensing that Victor's polished charm might yield more under the open sky than in the castle's stifling confines. The theft of the Whitby sapphire had tightened the web of suspicion around the household, and Victor, with his easy smiles and vague past, was a thread Miss Marple was eager to unravel. Victor walked with a casual grace, his hands in his pockets, his dark eyes scanning the horizon as if he were a gentleman of leisure. "You've chosen a fine spot for a walk, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished oak. "These gardens are a marvel, aren't they? Almost makes one forget the unpleasantness indoors." His smile was disarming, but Miss Marple, with her keen eye for human nature, noted the slight tension in his jaw, a crack in his otherwise flawless facade. "They are lovely," she agreed, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. "But gardens, like people, often hide their secrets beneath the surface. A rose may be beautiful, but its thorns are sharp. Don't you find, Mr. Langston, that appearances can be deceiving?" Her question was gentle, almost idle, but her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, watched him closely. Victor's laugh was light, but it lacked warmth. "You're a philosopher, Miss Marple." "Yes. I suppose appearances can mislead, but I'm an open book, I assure you." He spread his hands, as if inviting scrutiny, and Miss Marple noted the gleam of his cufflinks, gold, expensive, yet paired with a coat that showed faint signs of wear at the cuffs. She paused by a bed of late-blooming roses, her fingers brushing the petals as she spoke. "You've traveled widely, I understand. Paris, Vienna, such exciting places. It must be hard to settle in a quiet place like Blackthorn after such adventures." Her voice was warm, inviting confidence, but her words carried a subtle probe. Victor shrugged, his smile unwavering. "Oh, I enjoy the quiet now and then. Family roots, you know, they pull one back. I came to reconnect with the Whitbys to learn about my heritage." His words were smooth, but Miss Marple caught the fleeting glance he cast toward the castle, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "And what a time to arrive," she said, her needles clicking softly as she resumed walking. "Just before the sapphire's unveiling. It's a magnificent jewel, isn't it? I imagine it could tempt even the most honest heart." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "You were near the library last night, I believe. Mr. Grayson mentioned seeing you." Victor's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Did he? Well, I was fetching a book, couldn't sleep, you see. Old houses like this creak and groan, don't they? Keeps one awake." He chuckled, but Miss Marple noted the way his hand slipped into his pocket. A nervous gesture that reminded her of a young man in St. Mary Mead who had fidgeted when questioned about a stolen bicycle. "A book, of course," she said, nodding as if satisfied. "And yet, the sapphire was taken not long after. It's curious, isn't it, how such a theft requires both opportunity and nerve. In my village, we once had a case where a charming young man used his manners to gain trust, only to slip away with a silver tray." Her tone was conversational, but her gaze was steady, and she saw Victor's eyes narrow slightly. "You're full of stories, Miss Marple," he said, his voice still light but with an edge. "But I'm no thief. I've focked. No need for jewels. I prefer simpler pleasures, like a good book or a fine view." He gestured toward the cliffs, his smile returning, but Miss Marple caught the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow, a detail that spoke louder than his words. As they continued their walk, Miss Marple steered the conversation to lighter topics, the weather, watching Victor relax, his charm reasserting itself. But her mind was busy, piecing together the fragments of his behavior. His vague accounts of his past, his late-night wanderings, and now his nervous reaction to her questions all pointed to a man with something to hide. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a charming visitor had used his charisma to deflect suspicion, only to be caught with a stolen watch hidden in his luggage. Victor, she suspected, was cut from similar cloth. They returned to the castle as the sun dipped low, its light painting the stone walls in shades of amber. Inside, Miss Marple found Clara in the drawing room, her sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the sapphire, its facets rendered with meticulous care. The young woman looked up, her green eyes clouded with worry. "Miss Marple, have you found anything? This waiting, it's unbearable." Miss Marple settled beside her, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. "Patience, my dear. The truth has a way of surfacing, like a bubble in a pond. You've been thinking of the sapphire, I see." She nodded toward the sketch, her tone gentle but probing. Clara flushed, closing the book. "It's just a drawing. I couldn't stop thinking about it, its color, its light, but I didn't take it, Miss Marple. You must believe me." Her voice was earnest, but Miss Marple noted the way her fingers trembled, a sign of nerves, or perhaps a secret she was reluctant to share. "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said, her smile reassuring. "But you mentioned seeing Victor last night. Did he say anything to you, perhaps about the sapphire?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. He asked me about it, a few days ago. Wanted to know its value, how often it was taken out of the safe. I thought he was just curious, but now..." She trailed off, her expression troubled. He's been so kind, offering to help with my exhibition, but I wonder if he had other reasons. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging this new information. Victor's interest in the sapphire's value was a significant thread, one that aligned with his late-night presence near the library. She recalled a young woman in St. Mary Mead who had been charmed by a man offering to fund her dreams, only to find he was using her to gain access to her father's safe. Clara's trust in Victor, she suspected, might have been similarly exploited. As evening approached, Miss Marple retired to her room, her knitting a steady companion as she reflected on the day's findings. Victor's charm was a carefully crafted mask, hiding a restlessness that suggested desperation or greed. Clara's revelation about his questions confirmed her suspicions, but the sapphire's whereabouts remained elusive. The lavender scent near the safe Grayson's guarded demeanor. And now Victor's probing inquiries formed a pattern, one that Miss Marple was determined to unravel. She thought of a theft in her village, where a charming outsider had used flattery to gain trust, only to vanish with a prized heirloom. The sapphire, she sensed, was still close, its thief relying on guile to evade detection. With her needles clicking like a quiet pulse, Miss Marple resolved to keep watch, knowing that Victor's next move might reveal the truth or tighten the noose around his own neck. Chapter 6. A Nighttime Discovery. The moon hung low over Blackthorn Castle, its pale light casting eerie shadows across the courtyard, where the stones gleamed like polished bone. Inside, the household had settled into an uneasy quiet, the theft of the Whitby sapphire a weight that pressed upon every conversation, every glance. Miss Jane Marple, however, was far from restful. Her room, with its heavy drapes and creaking floorboards, offered a vantage point over the courtyard, and she had positioned herself by the window, her knitting needles idle for once. The day's revelations, Victor's probing questions, Clara's unease, Grayson's guarded sorrow had sharpened her focus, and she sensed that the thief, emboldened or desperate, might move under cover of night. She had feigned fatigue after dinner, excusing herself early with a murmur about needing rest, but her eyes were as alert as those of a village cat stalking a sparrow. The castle's clocks chimed midnight, their echoes fading into the stillness. When Miss Marple's patience was rewarded, a figure emerged from a side door, moving swiftly across the courtyard toward the stables. The moonlight caught the glint of dark hair and the outline of a slender frame. Victor Langston, carrying a small leather bag. His steps were cautious, his head turning to scan the shadows, and Miss Marple, with a dexterity that belied her age, slipped into her shawl and followed, her soft-soled shoes silent on the stairs. The night air was sharp with the scent of salt and damp earth as she crossed the courtyard, keeping to the shadows of the castle walls. The stables, a low stone building with a sagging roof, stood at the edge of the grounds, their doors ajar. Miss Marple paused, her breath steady, and peered through a gap in the weathered wood. Victor was inside, his movements furtive as he knelt beside an old carriage, its paint chipped and wheels rusted. He pried at a panel beneath the seat, revealing a small compartment. With a quick glance over his shoulder, he reached inside, his hand emerging empty. His face, briefly illuminated by the moonlight, twisted in frustration, and he muttered something under his breath before replacing the panel and slipping back toward the castle. Miss Marple waited until his footsteps faded, then entered the stable, her heart beating with the quiet thrill of discovery. The carriage smelled of mildew and old leather, but she found the panel easily, its edges loose from Victor's tampering. Inside was nothing, no sapphire, no clue, but the compartment's existence was telling. It was a hiding place, one Victor clearly knew, and his disappointment suggested the sapphire had either been moved or was never there. Miss Marple's mind flickered to a case in St. Mary Mead, where a thief had used a hollowed-out tree to stash stolen goods, only to find them gone when a confederate betrayed him. Was Victor working alone, or had someone else outwitted him? She returned to her room, her mind racing as she settled back by the window. Victor's nighttime excursion confirmed her suspicions of his guilt, but the empty compartment raised new questions. Had he hidden the sapphire elsewhere, fearing discovery? Or was he searching for it, perhaps suspecting another? The lavender scent she had noted near the safe lingered in her thoughts, a delicate thread that might tie to Lady Eleanor, or another clue entirely. She recalled a village incident where a stolen ring had been hidden in a servant's quarters, only to be moved when the thief grew nervous. The sapphire, she sensed, was still within the castle's reach, its thief caught in a web of their own. Making dot as she resumed her knitting, the needles clicking like a metronome, Miss Marple considered her next steps. Victor's actions demanded closer scrutiny, but she must tread carefully. His charm was a weapon, and he was no fool. Clara's mention of his questions about the sapphire's value, coupled with Grayson's observation of his late-night wanderings, painted a picture of a man with a plan, one driven by need or greed. Yet Grayson's own reticence, and the photograph of his daughter, suggested a personal stake that might cloud his judgment. Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead gardener who had covered for his son's theft, driven by love rather than complicity. Could Grayson be protecting someone, or was his distraction a sign of deeper involvement? The castle slept, but Miss Marple's mind was a hive of activity, sorting the threads of motive and opportunity. Victor's empty-handed return from the stable was a puzzle piece, one that suggested either cunning or miscalculation. She resolved to watch him closely, perhaps even to bait him into revealing more. The sapphire, she felt certain, was not for its brilliance, too great to be spirited away so easily. With her knitting a steady companion, she sat by the window until dawn, her eyes on the courtyard, knowing that the thief's next move would be the key to unraveling the mystery. Chapter 7. The Uncle's Bluster. The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds, casting a pallid light over Blackthorn Castle's dining room, where breakfast was a tense affair. The clink of porcelain and the murmur of strained pleasantries filled the air, but the absence of the Whitby sapphire hung over the table like a spectre. Miss Jane Marple, seated with her tea and toast, observed the family with her usual quiet acuity. Victor's late-night excursion to the stables had sharpened her focus, but she knew the web of suspicion extended beyond him. Lord Percival Whitby, with his booming voice and bristling mustache, was a figure whose bluster demanded scrutiny, and Miss Marple resolved to probe his motives before the day grew older. Lord Percival sat at the head of the table, his plate piled with kedgeree, his manner as commanding as if he were still in his regimental days. He spoke loudly of the weather, the state of the roads, anything but the theft. Yet his eyes darted toward Sir Reginald, who ate in silence, his face drawn. Clara, picking at her food, seemed distracted, her sketchbook absent for once. Victor, ever the charmer, offered a light remark about the castle's history. But Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tapped restlessly on his cup, a sign of nerves beneath his polished exterior. Grayson moved silently, refilling teapots with his usual discretion, though Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance he cast toward Lord Percival, as if gauging his mood. After breakfast, Miss Marple found Lord Percival in the study, a wood room smelling of leather and cigar smoke. He stood by a window, staring out at the cliffs, his hands clasped behind his back in a military stance. A decanter of brandy sat on a side table, its level noticeably lower than the previous day. Miss Marple, her knitting bag in tow, knocked softly and entered, her smile as disarming as a village spinster's. "Good morning, Lord Percival," she said, settling into a chair with her needles already clicking. "I hope I'm not intruding. This theft has everyone on edge, and I thought you might have some thoughts on the matter. You've a keen eye, I'm sure, from your years of command." Lord Percival turned, his mustache twitching with a mix of pride and irritation. "Keen eye, eh? I should hope so, Miss Marple. This business is a disgrace. A thief under our roof. I told Reginald to call the police, but he's dithering, as usual." He puffed out his chest, but Miss Marple noted the way his hand strayed to his pocket, jingling coins in a nervous rhythm she had seen before. "Indeed," she said, her tone mild. "You suspect someone close, then? It's a bold thief who opens a safe without a trace." She watched his reaction, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. Lord Percival's face reddened. "Bold, insolent, more like it's that butler Grayson. Mark my words, too quiet, always hovering. Knows the safe's combination, doesn't he? Or that cousin, Victor, slippery fellow, turning up out of nowhere. I don't trust him an inch." He slammed a fist on the desk, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of unease in his eyes, as if his bluster were a shield. "You were in this very study last night, I believe," she said, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "A nightcap, you said. It must be pleasant, having a quiet moment to yourself. Did you hear anything unusual? Footsteps, perhaps, near the library?" Lord Percival's eyes narrowed, and he jingled the coins again. "Nothing, Miss Marple. I was alone, minding my own business. No one to vouch for me, but I'm no thief. The very idea." His indignation was fierce, but Miss Marple noted the way his gaze slid away, avoiding hers. A telltale sign she had seen in a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper. Caught pilfering from his own till. Of course not. She soothed, her needles clicking steadily. "But you've known financial strain, I understand. Old families often face such burdens. In my village, a gentleman once sold a family heirloom to settle debts. Pride can make such choices difficult." Her words were soft, but they struck a nerve, and she saw Lord Percival's hand clench. "Debts? Humph. I've had my reverses, yes, but I'd never stoop to theft. The sapphires, a Whitby treasure, belongs to the family, not some pawnbroker." His voice was loud, but Miss Marple caught the tremor in it, a hint of shame, or perhaps fear. She recalled a retired major in St. Mary Mead, proud to a fault, who had covered his losses with bluster until a stolen candlestick betrayed him. She thanked him and left the study, her mind cataloguing his reactions. Lord Percival's indignation was genuine, but his weak alibi and nervous habits suggested a man wrestling with more than pride. His financial troubles were a motive, yet his attachment to the family name seemed to outweigh his greed. Could he have acted in a moment of desperation, or was his bluster a distraction from another's guilt? In the hall, Miss Marple encountered Clara, who was hurrying toward the conservatory, her face pale. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "I need to tell you something. It's about Victor. I borrowed money from him, for my exhibition. He was so generous, but now I'm wondering if he expected something in return." Her eyes were wide, and Miss Marple noted the guilt in them, as if Clara feared she had been complicit in some scheme. "My dear," Miss Marple said, her tone maternal, "you mustn't blame yourself. But what did Victor say about this loan? Did he mention the sapphire?" Clara nodded, her hands twisting together. "He asked if I'd ever seen it out of the safe, how it was guarded. I thought he was just curious. But now, I feel such a fool." Her voice broke, and Miss Marple patted her hand, recalling a young woman in St. Mary Mead, who had been charmed into revealing a safe's location by a suitor with ulterior motives. "You've done nothing wrong," Miss Marple said, "but tell me, did you see Victor anywhere unusual near the stables, perhaps?" She asked this casually, but her eyes were sharp, testing Clara's reaction. Clara shook her head. "The stables? No, I haven't. But he's been restless, always wandering at odd hours. I saw him near the library again last night, after I spoke to you." Her words confirmed Miss Marple's observations, tightening the thread around Victor. As the afternoon drew on, Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting a steady companion as she reflected. Lord Percival's bluster masked a vulnerability, but she doubted he had the cunning for the theft. His pride was too rigid, his methods too direct. Victor, however, was a different matter. His loan to Clara, his questions about the sapphire, and his nighttime visit to the stables painted a picture of calculated intent. The lavender scent near the safe Grayson's reticence. And now Clara's confession formed a complex pattern, one Miss Marple was determined to unravel. She thought of a St. Mary Mead theft, where a proud man had deflected suspicion with loud accusations, only to be undone by a quiet clue. The sapphire, she felt, was still within the castle, its thief relying on misdirection. With her needles clicking like a quiet pulse, she resolved to press Victor further, sensing that his next slip would reveal the truth. Chapter 8. The Stable's Secret. The midday sun hung over Blackthorn Castle, its light muted by a veil of clouds that mirrored the household's somber mood. The theft of the Whitby sapphire had cast a long shadow, and the family's strained civility at lunch betrayed their growing unease. Miss Jane Marple, however, found her resolve sharpened by the morning's revelations. Victor Langston's nocturnal visit to the stables, Clara's confession about his loan, and Lord Percival's defensive bluster had woven a tighter web of suspicion. With the household distracted by their meal, Miss Marple saw her chance to investigate the stables, where Victor's empty-handed search had hinted at a secret yet to be uncovered. Slipping out through a side door, she crossed the courtyard, her shawl drawn against the damp breeze from the cliffs. The stables, weathered and half-forgotten, stood at the edge of the grounds, their stone walls mottled with lichen. The door creaked as she entered, the air heavy with the scent of hay and old leather. The carriage Victor had inspected the previous Night loomed in the dim light, its chipped paint and rusted wheels a testament to neglect. Miss Marple, with the quiet determination of one accustomed to uncovering hidden truths, approached the vehicle, her eyes scanning for the panel Victor had opened. The compartment was cleverly concealed beneath the seat, its edges flush with the wood. She knelt, her fingers tracing the panel until it gave way with a soft click. Inside was a small velvet pouch, its fabric soft but empty, bearing the faint, unmistakable scent of lavender. Lady Eleanor's perfume, the same Miss Marple had noted near the safe. The pouch was too fine for a servant's use, its delicate stitching suggesting it had once held the sapphire itself. She tucked it into her knitting bag, her mind racing with possibilities. Had Victor hidden the sapphire here, only to move it, or had someone else used the compartment first? The lavender scent was a tantalizing clue, tying the stable to the library in a way she could not yet fully grasp. Miss Marple straightened, brushing dust from her skirt, and surveyed the stable for further clues. The straw-strewn floor showed clear footprints, but a faint scuff mark near the carriage suggested recent activity. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen locket had been hidden in a barn, only to be moved when the thief feared discovery. The empty pouch suggested a similar caution, but whether Victor was the thief or a searcher remained unclear. She left the stable, her steps careful to avoid notice, and returned to the castle, her thoughts a tangle of threads waiting to be sorted in the hall. She encountered Grayson, who was carrying a tray of polished silver to the dining room. His face, usually a mask of professionalism, betrayed a flicker of concern as he met her gaze. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, "I hope you're making progress. The family is unsettled." His eyes darted toward the dining room, where raised voices Lord Percival's predictably cooed faintly. "You're very kind to worry." "Mr. Grayson," she replied, her tone warm but probing. "I wonder, have you noticed anything unusual today, perhaps someone near the stables?" She watched him closely, noting the slight stiffening of his posture. "The stables, madam." Grayson's brow furrowed, but his expression remained guarded. "I've had no cause to go there. The servants use it rarely, only for storing old tack." He hesitated, then added, "But I did overhear Mr. Langston on the telephone this morning, in the library. He was speaking to someone in London, arranging to meet about a valuable item. I thought you should know." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the reluctance in his tone, as if betraying a guest pained him. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said, her smile reassuring. "You've been most helpful." As he moved away, she noted the way his hand lingered on the tray, a sign of unease that reminded her of a St. Mary Mead butler who had known more than he admitted about a stolen brooch. Grayson's loyalty was clear, but his daughter's photograph. And now this revelation about Victor suggested a man caught between duty and personal burdens. Miss Marple retired to the drawing room, where she found Clara alone, staring out at the cliffs. The young woman's hands were clasped tightly, her sketchbook nowhere in sight. "Miss Marple," she said, turning, "I can't bear this suspicion. Everyone's looking at everyone else, and I feel trapped." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple, with her maternal instinct, patted her arm. "It's a trying time, my dear," she said. "But the truth has a way of rising, like cream in a churn." You mentioned Victor's loan. Has he pressed you about it since the theft? Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. No, but he's been strange restless. This morning, he asked if I'd seen anyone near the stables. I hadn't, but it struck me as odd. Why would he care? Her words confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions, and she filed away this new piece of the puzzle. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple sat by the drawing-room fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as she pieced together her findings. The velvet pouch, with its lavender scent, was a direct link to the sapphire, suggesting it had been hidden or meant to be hidden in the stable. Victor's nighttime search, his telephone call about a valuable item, and his questions to Clara pointed to his guilt, but the empty pouch suggested either caution or betrayal. The lavender scent tied to Lady Eleanor, yet Miss Marple doubted. Her involvement, her distress, was too genuine. Grayson's revelation added weight to Victor's actions, but his own reticence hinted at a personal stake, perhaps tied to his daughter. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen necklace had been hidden in a garden shed, only to be moved when the thief suspected a search. The sapphire, she felt certain, was still close, its thief relying on misdirection to evade detection. Victor's charm and cunning made him the likely culprit, but the empty pouch raised the possibility of an accomplice or a rival. With her needles clicking like a quiet clock, Miss Marple resolved to confront Victor indirectly, perhaps with the pouch itself, to gauge his reaction. The truth, she knew, was near, waiting in the shadows of Blackthorn Castle like a forgotten stitch in a tapestry. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The evening shadows lengthened across Blackthorn Castle, their edges softening the grand hall's stern lines as the family gathered for dinner. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, the clink of cutlery a brittle counterpoint to the strained silence. Miss Jane Marple, seated modestly at the table's end, observed the scene with her quiet, penetrating gaze. The velvet pouch from the stable, now tucked safely in her knitting bag, was a tangible clue, its lavender scent linking the theft to the castle's heart. Victor Langston's nocturnal search, his suspicious telephone call, and Clara's revelations had tightened the noose around him. But Miss Marple knew the truth required a final nudge, a carefully staged confrontation to unravel the thief's composure. Dinner passed with forced civility. Sir Reginald, his face still drawn from the sapphire's loss, spoke little, his fork moving mechanically. Lady Eleanor, ever the hostess, attempted to steer the conversation toward neutral ground, the weather, the cliffs, but her voice faltered under the weight of the family's unease. Lord Percival, his mustache bristling, muttered about the disgrace of it all, his eyes darting to Victor with ill-concealed suspicion. Clara, pale and restless, pushed her food around her plate, her glances flickering between Victor and Miss Marple, as if sensing the evening's tension. Victor, for his part, maintained his charm, offering a light remark about the castle's history. But Miss Marple noted the faint strain in his smile, the way his fingers tapped the stem of his wineglass. After dinner, Miss Marple requested a gathering in the library, her tones so mild that none could refuse without seeming churlish. The family assembled reluctantly, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Grayson stood by the door, his presence as unobtrusive as ever, though Miss Marple caught the flicker of concern in his eyes. The library, with its heavy shelves and the open safe in the corner, was a fitting stage for her purpose. The place where the sapphire had vanished, now a silent witness to her revelations. She stood, her knitting bag at her side, her demeanor that of a kindly aunt addressing a family gathering. "I've been given 2 days to look into this matter," she began, her voice gentle but clear, "and I believe we are close to the truth. The Whitby sapphire is a treasure, not only of value, but of trust, and its theft has wounded this family deeply. But thieves, like careless knitters, leave loose threads, and I've found a few worth pulling." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, noting Sir Reginald's anxious frown, Lady Eleanor's clasped hands, Clara's wide-eyed tension, Lord Percival's scowl, and Victor's carefully neutral expression. From her knitting bag, she produced the velvet pouch, holding it up so its soft fabric caught the lamplight. "This was found in the stables, hidden in a carriage compartment. It bears the scent of lavender. Lady Eleanor's perfume, I believe, and is fine enough to have held the sapphire. Does anyone recognize it?" Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "That's mine. I used it to store the sapphire when it was cleaned last month." "How did it come to be in the stables?" Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple saw genuine shock in her eyes, ruling out her involvement. Victor's smile tightened, but he leaned back in his chair, his voice smooth. "A curious find, Miss Marple, but I'm afraid I've no connection to it. Perhaps a servant misplaced it." His tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the way his hand slipped into his pocket. A gesture she had seen in St. Mary Mead when a young man was caught lying about a stolen watch. She turned to him, her gaze soft but unrelenting. "Perhaps, Mr. Langston. But you were seen near the library the night of the theft, and again last night, in the stables, searching that very compartment. You spoke of a valuable item on the telephone this morning, arranging to meet someone in London. These are curious coincidences, don't you think?" Her words were gentle, but they landed like stones, and she saw Victor's composure waver, his eyes darting to the door. Lord Percival snorted, his fist banging the arm of his chair. "I knew it. A slippery fellow, that one. What have you to say, Langston?" His bluster was loud, but Miss Marple caught the relief in his tone, as if Victor's guilt absolved his own suspicions. "Clara," her voice shaking, added, "you asked me about the sapphire's value, Victor. You offered me a loan, but was it to get close to the safe?" Her eyes were bright with betrayal, and Miss Marple noted the guilt in them, as if Clara felt complicit for trusting him. Victor laughed, a sound too sharp to be convincing. "This is absurd. The pouch is mine, yes, a family trinket, nothing more. I was in the stables looking for a book I'd left there. As for the telephone, it was a business matter, nothing to do with jewels." His words were quick, but Miss Marple saw the sheen of perspiration on his brow, the same nervous sign she had noted in the garden. She stepped forward, her voice still mild but firm. "A trinket, Mr. Langston. Yet Lady Eleanor claims the pouch as hers, used for the sapphire, and the lavender scent hardly a coincidence, is it? In my village, a young man once hid stolen goods in a shed, thinking himself clever, but his lies unraveled when confronted with the evidence." She held up the pouch again, her eyes locked on his. Victor's smile vanished, and for a moment, silence gripped the room. Then, with a sudden lurch, he sprang to his feet, his face pale. This is nonsense. You've no proof. He moved toward the door, but Grayson, with surprising swiftness, stepped forward, blocking his path. The butler's face was impassive, but his stance was resolute, and Miss Marple saw the loyalty in his eyes, tempered by a quiet resolve. "Victor, please," Lady Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "If you know something, tell us. The sapphire is our legacy." Under the weight of their gazes, Victor's shoulders slumped, his charm crumbling like a poorly knit seam. "All right," he muttered, his voice low. "I took it. I needed money, gambling debts, you see. I couldn't pay them off. I used a wax impression of the safe key, made during a visit last week. The sapphires in London, with a buyer. I was going to settle my debts and be gone." His confession was halting, but Miss Marple saw the truth in his defeated posture. The same resignation she had seen in a St. Mary Mead thief, caught with a stolen brooch. Sir Reginald rose, his face thunderous. "You scoundrel! To betray our trust!" He turned to Miss Marple, his voice softening. "Miss Marple, you've saved us. How can we thank you?" She smiled, her needles clicking softly as she tucked the pouch away. "The truth is its own reward, Sir Reginald. But I suggest you call the police now. Mr. Langston has a buyer to name, and the sapphire must be recovered." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes held a quiet triumph, knowing the puzzle was nearly complete, as the family murmured in shock and relief. Miss Marple sat back, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. Victor's confession had tied the threads together, but the lavender pouch and Grayson's reticence lingered in her mind, hinting at smaller secrets yet to be unraveled. For now, though, the sapphire's path was clear, and Blackthorn Castle could begin to heal. Chapter 10. The Resolution. The morning after Victor Langston's confession dawned clear over Blackthorn Castle. The cliffs bathed in a rare golden light that seemed to cleanse the air of its lingering tensions. The library where the truth had unraveled the previous night was quiet now, its heavy curtains drawn back to admit the sun. Miss Jane Marple sat in a corner, her knitting needles clicking softly, her presence as unobtrusive as ever. The Whitby sapphire's theft had been solved, yet she sensed the family's wounds would need time to heal. Her task, however, was not quite finished. There were threads to tie off, and a final reckoning to ensure the jewels' return. Sir Reginald, his face a mix of relief and indignation, had summoned the police at first light. 2 constables from the nearby town of St. Ives arrived, their notebooks open as Victor, now subdued and pale, repeated his confession. He provided the name of a London pawnbroker, a shady figure known to deal in rare gems, and the address of a backstreet shop where the sapphire awaited its buyer. Miss Marple, listening quietly, noted the precision of her earlier deductions. The lavender-scented pouch, Victor's nocturnal search, his calculated charm—all had pointed to a man driven by desperation. She recalled a St. Mary Mead swindler who had sold a stolen cameo to settle debts, only to be caught when his buyer boasted too freely. Victor's fate, she suspected, would be similar. Lady Eleanor, her composure restored but her eyes still shadowed, approached Miss Marple as the police prepared to escort Victor away. "Jane, you've done us an immeasurable service," she said, her voice warm with gratitude. "The sapphire is our legacy, but your clarity saved more than a jewel, it saved our trust." She clasped Miss Marple's hand, and the older woman smiled, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "It's only a matter of noticing, Eleanor," she said. "People are much like my knitting patterns emerge if one looks closely." Her tone was modest, but her mind was already sifting through the smaller mysteries that lingered. Grayson's reticence, Clara's guilt, the faint echoes of the family's secrets. Clara, who had lingered by the window, approached next, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. "Miss Marple, I feel such a fool," she said, her voice low. "I trusted Victor, borrowed his money, and never suspected. I'll repay it with my paintings, I swear. I won't rely on anyone again." Her green eyes were fierce with resolve. And Miss Marple patted her arm, seeing in her the spark of a young woman in St. Mary Mead, who had rebuilt her life after a betrayal. "You've learned, my dear," Miss Marple said. "Trust is precious, but so is your talent. Let it guide you." She noted Clara's renewed determination, a sign that the theft, painful as it was, had forged a new strength in her. Lord Percival, still grumbling but visibly chastened, joined them, his mustache no longer bristling with quite the same vigor. "Miss Marple, I misjudged you," he admitted, his voice gruff. "Thought you were just a meddling old woman, but you've a sharper mind than most. I'll curb my spending, mark my words, no more races for me." His hand stayed still. No coins jingling, and Miss Marple saw in him a man humbled by the near loss of his family's honor. She recalled a proud St. Mary Mead merchant who had sworn off gambling after a stolen purse exposed his debts. And she nodded, satisfied. Grayson, ever discreet, approached as the family dispersed, his face a mask of quiet pride. "Miss Marple, the household owes you a debt," he said, his tone formal but warm. "The sapphire's return is a relief to us all." His eyes, however, held a trace of sorrow, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the photograph in his pantry. "Your daughter, Emily," she said gently. "I hope she's well. You've carried a burden for her, haven't you?" Her question was soft, but her gaze was steady, and she saw Grayson's composure waver. He nodded, his voice low. "She's had troubles, madam, but she's a good girl. I've saved what I can for her, and I'll join her in London soon. My time here is drawing to a close." His admission was a quiet confession, and Miss Marple understood his distraction. His reticence, father's love, not guilt, had weighed on him. She thought of a St. Mary Mead gardener who had retired to care for his ailing son, and she smiled, wishing Grayson well by noon. Word came from London. The police had recovered the Whitby sapphire from the pawnbroker's shop, its deep blue facets unharmed. Sir Reginald, his spirits lifted, insisted on a celebratory tea, and the family gathered in the drawing-room, the tension of the past days easing like a knot undone. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, listened as they spoke of plans to secure the sapphire more carefully, perhaps in a bank vault. Sir Reginald mused. She offered no opinion, but her mind wandered to the human frailties that no vault could guard against: greed, desperation, the masks people wore. As she prepared to leave Blackthorn Castle, her suitcase packed and her knitting bag at her side, Miss Marple stood by the entrance hall, gazing at the cliffs one last time. The sea roared below, its rhythm a reminder of life's ceaseless ebb and flow. The sapphire's recovery was a triumph, but she knew the family's scars would linger. Clara's newfound resolve, Lord Percival's humbled pride, Grayson's quiet departure. Victor's betrayal had exposed their vulnerabilities, but it had also revealed their resilience. Lady Eleanor escorted her to the waiting car, her gratitude evident. "Jane, you must visit again, under happier circumstances," she said. "You've a gift for seeing what others miss." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Perhaps, Eleanor, but it's only a matter of looking, really. People are much the same, whether in a castle or a village." She climbed into the car, her knitting needles clicking as the driver started the engine. As Blackthorn Castle receded into the distance, she thought of St. Mary Mead, where simpler mysteries awaited, though none, she suspected, would match the brilliance of the sapphire or the complexity of the hearts it had exposed. With a quiet satisfaction, she turned her thoughts to home, ready for the next pattern to unravel.